Welcome to the Art of Marketing Operations, a Taylor podcast. Here you can grow your knowledge about marketing operations, listen to ideas and strategies to help you scale, grow, and optimize your efficiency, drive your speed to market, and enrich your work life. Let's get to it.
Welcome to the Art of Marketing Operations, a Taylor podcast. I'm Glenn Bottomley, and today my guest is Peter Mahoney, founder and CEO of Plannuh, which was acquired by Plannuh Inc. in fall of 2022. Plannuh enables seamless collaboration between finance and marketing teams. Peter is also co-author of the book, The Next CMO, a guide to operational marketing excellence, and he is the host of the Next CMO podcast. Thanks for joining us today, Peter.
Glad to be here, Glenn. You make me sound really busy.
Well, Peter, I know that you find huge value in operationally excellent functions and how that ultimately sort of leads organizations to have strong practices with their plans, with their goals, targets, measurements, etc. So how do you think that rhythm is found in marketing teams, and why is that so important to even think about and discuss?
Well, it's interesting, Glenn, because it often isn't found in marketing teams. And that's the problem that I set out to solve when I started this company, Plannuh, back in 2017. And even before then, when I was a practicing CMO, and the last CMO gig I had was as the CMO of about a $2 billion public software company. And we had a complex, messy organization, 5 divisions, 35 business units, 100 acquisitions. And I saw over and over again the fact that most elements of companies that I was dealing with that we acquired, they really struggled with this stuff. They did not have operational excellence. They did not have good alignment with the business. So to answer your question, most people don't have it at all because it's hard to do. And that's why I set out on this many-year mission to try to bring people into the light, I guess is the way to think about it.
Sure. Well, when I read your book, The Next CMO, one of the things that I thought really hit me was how practical every single chapter, templates, real world advice, how to actually, work through all of the various areas in a marketing organization. And one of the areas that I know that you spend a good deal of time on is on the financial side of it. A lot of different tools, how to look at financials, how to partner with a CMO, what to look for, etc. So obviously there is a huge financial component through this process. So can you explain and expand a little bit more about how that financial piece sort of fits into marketing operations teams themselves, and how to always make sure that you're bringing financial rigor to all of the work that we're doing?
Yeah, Glenn, it's incredibly important that any functional leader in a company and any manager in a company just has a solid financial IQ. You should understand the basic building blocks of the financial health of your company. So you should have a good understanding of the P&L and the balance sheet, what those things mean, how your particular element of the company feeds into that and impacts that over time. Those things are incredibly important to understand. And on a day-to-day basis, it's amazing how that can drive a lot of your decisions. So as a marketing operations leader or a marketing executive, one of the things that you need to understand is what is the overall impact that marketing has, and what do each of the decisions that you're making, what do they do to drive an impact on ultimately a financial measure on the P&L? And I can argue that almost anything you do at a marketer, its outcome can be measured and can be seen somewhere on a P&L or a balance sheet. It takes some logic steps to get there, but understanding that connectiveness, understanding that, hey, I'm not just going to send a bunch of emails to get people to open and read them. The goal is to get people to maybe get nurtured to some certain point where some percentage of those people turn into customers. If they're a customer, they pay us revenue, and they pay us revenue at a certain gross margin, and that margin flows through ultimately to the P&L. So you have an understanding of what the business impact is. Even if it doesn't show up today, you should understand ultimately where that's going. And that should drive virtually all of your day-to-day decisions as a marketing leader, as a marketing operations leader. It's really about what the financial outcome that you're generating from your activities and your campaigns and your goals. What are you trying to drive as a marketing leader that's going to ultimately benefit the business? Yeah.
And I want to build on that a little bit, because you, in the book, you speak a lot about the return on marketing investment and that ROI aspect of it. And so I think, to your point about understanding those financials, it gives you it arms you with such insight into activity and value that a marketing team is delivering. So can you talk and build on your comments on the financial aspect and how to then translate or think about what that means from an ROI perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So ROI is one of these incredibly misunderstood kind of concepts inside marketing organizations, and it shouldn't be. So think about it. So return on investment. Literally, there are two variables in that equation, return and investment. So it should be pretty simple, right? The reality is people aren't calculating it correctly in a lot of cases. So what is a return? So a return is not a pipeline, as an example, because not all pipeline turns into revenue. And in fact, revenue isn't really a return. You should really factor in your gross margin. So what is the margin contribution from the marketing activity that is happening in real time or will happen over time in most cases in marketing, because it's more of a predictive measure in most marketing things. And then what's the investment? And the investment is not always clear. So what a lot of people look at when they measure ROI, they're actually measuring return on ad spend in a lot of cases. So what they're doing is they're saying, well, I spent $10,000 in media in this campaign. Well, is that all you spent? Was there a production element to the media? Did I make some beautiful print signage as part of it, as an example? So all of those factors go into the I side of the investment. And then it's simply the difference of those two measures. So what is the return minus the investment that I made? And that can be a negative number if your investment is higher than the return, divided by the investment. So that's what the number is. So it's fairly simple in concept, but in practice, people often mix up these things. So on a day-to-day basis, there are a few things you should understand as a marketer. First of all, you should understand at a high level what the expectation is for your company for a return on a marketing investment. So what's the expectation? What's a good number for your business? And think about this in your personal life. So typically ROI is expressed as a ratio versus a percentage. So it's 3x ROI means it's a 300% return on that investment. That's pretty good, right? So if you got that on your savings account, you'd feel really darn good about that. And in fact, a 0.3x ROI is a 30% return on investment. Still pretty good. Right. So is that good for your business? For your business, you need to understand the relative value you're creating. So is a 30% return on invested capital for the business, is that better than what I'd get for making similar investments in other areas of the business? So understanding at a high level what's a good number for ROI is super important. The other thing that I like to do is kind of break it down and say, if you look and deconstruct your conversion funnel, as an example, you should be able to understand what the value is of each step for each outcome along your conversion funnel. So you understand what a typical conversion of is lead to a qualified lead to an opportunity to a sale to ultimately a lifetime customer, as an example. If you follow that back up and say, hey, my average contract value is $50,000. If I convert 20% of opportunities, that means an opportunity is worth $10,000 in revenue. If I convert 10% of qualified leads, that means the lead is worth $1,000 in revenue. If I have 70% gross margins, that means that lead is worth $700 in value. Understanding
backing
that.
It all up.
Exactly. So Glenn, understanding that, if you can imagine that all of a sudden you're saying, I know the value of a lead on average, or I know the value of an opportunity on average. Now I can understand what the threshold is for spending as a benchmark. So I say, well, if a lead is on average worth $700 and I'm spending $2,000 to get a lead, bad idea. Unless there's something special about those leads, right? And we can talk about that. If I'm spending $200 to get $700 of value, wow, I should be doing that all day long and maybe I should be doing more. So understanding those mechanics of the financials, the financial impact of those marketing decisions is incredibly important because it will really direct your day-to-day decisions about how you're optimizing those dollars.
Yeah, that's outstanding. I love the concept of backing that all up and essentially attaching a value to each step in the funnel, and being able to assess what that value is. Because to your point, then that can help influence your investment decisions for pay-per-click advertising or other marketing activities. If you can understand that cost, is this worth it? Am I overspending for this? Will I ever make this return back on that investment? And your last comment made me think a bit, because in your book, there was a statistic that I thought was really, really fascinating. And you were commenting about the percentage of MQL, marketing qualified lead, converting to sales qualified lead. And I'll paraphrase here, but you were saying that you should want to be right in between that 60 to 80%. That about 60 to 80% of your MQLs should be converting to SQL, because if you have more than 80% conversion, that means if I'm sending sales one lead and it converts, I send another lead, it converts, then I'm not sending enough leads if I'm over 80% conversion. But if I'm under 60% conversion, then I'm sending maybe too many, unqualified leads, MQLs, to sales, because sales are just throwing them off left and right, disqualifying, it's not converting enough. So that sweet spot of the 60 to 80, that was a really interesting heuristic that you had in the book. Can you comment a little bit further on that? In the definitions of what do you call an MQL and what do you call an SQL?
Yeah, it's a great question, Glenn. And as many of these kind of benchmark standards, your mileage will vary. So you have to look at all these things with a lens of your particular business. But it's a good rule of thumb to think about and to really make some tests. So first of all, what is an MQL and what's an SQL? So there are lots of definitions. The terms were coined first by Serious Decisions, which is now part of Forrester, and the great bunch of people there. By the way, you should check out their stuff. I've been working with them for many, many years. In fact, John Neeson, who is the founder of Serious Decisions, now teaches at Boston College right down the street from me. And I'm going to be teaching one of his classes in the coming month or two. So looking forward to that. But what is it? So a marketing qualified lead, or MQL, is basically a lead that meets the qualification definition that your sales team has determined is appropriate for your target market, or your ICP, your ideal customer profile. And it makes all the attributes. And you can decide what that is. Your mileage is going to vary, but it's basically what the sales team and marketing agree, their handshake that says that, yes, these are the criteria that determine qualification. And marketing says, yes, it meets that qualification. Sales, of course, has the ability to assess that and say, did I actually make that number? Did it actually meet those qualification criteria or not. And it's a reasonable test to do to make sure that you're sort of keeping people whole, because you want to measure the marketing team on lead production as one element. Ultimately, you want to measure them on more sort of tangible business outcomes. But as a tracking metric, they should be targeted on, hey, this is what am I doing today for lead production, as an example, for qualified leads. And then there's this idea of acceptance. So the sales team is going to say yes or no, because you want them to have some scrutiny that they apply to each of these things to say, yeah, is that right, to give people the right feedback. And you're exactly right. That range of about 60 to 80% is a good number to think about, because if it's less than 60% get accepted, if you're getting a third of leads accepted, as an example, to make an extreme, you're wasting sales time going through a bunch of leads. But if they accept everything, then you're probably putting too tight of a filter on things. And there may be some things that really are qualified leads that you're not handing to them. So that's why that benchmark that I use, that sort of guardrails in that 60 to 80% range, is a good one to think about. And again, don't think about it blindly. If it's 59, it's okay. If it's 81, it's okay. But if it's 10 or it's 99, you probably got an issue.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Thank you for that. So how are you using the book today? In your work now, obviously, as a, former CMO and CEO, et cetera, you have so much rich experience. How have you been feeling that you've been utilizing your own book?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Glenn. First of all, I call myself a recovering CMO is the term that I use. And it's interesting. So brief little story about how we decided to write the book. So I started this company on the premise that I believed that marketing teams needed to be more rigorous around their operations, needed to have a better system for sort of managing agile marketing plans and being able to measure and optimize outcomes based on ROI. Not a shocking concept, by the way. That's the kind of thing everyone should nod their head and say, yes, that's a good thing to do. My assumption was at the beginning, we were going to build something that was basically a product-led growth model. So we said, hey, let's put something out there and have people just make it easy enough so people can set up a plan and start going. And then if they want to expand, then they pay us money, that type of thing. That was the original premise for the business. What shocked me was that when I got this thing out in the wild for the first time, and this was probably sometime in 2018, what I realized was people were struggling. And they were struggling because they actually didn't know how to make a marketing plan. They didn't know these concepts. And some of it has been because marketing has gotten so overly complicated and you have to be so specialized in certain domains within marketing. People lost the thread of what does it mean to be a marketer, a marketing leader, a marketing executive. So that was the gap. So I decided that what we needed to do is we needed to write it down, because what we were doing is literally we had these conversations and we're teaching people. We said, let's write it down. So Scott and Dan, who are my co-founders, and I sat down and we sat in a conference room for about 2 days straight and fought and hashed out our outline for what the book was going to be. And then it became our blog content calendar for the next 6 months. And ultimately it became a book. And then we did a second edition of the book as we got some feedback from the first one and expanded and things like that. So that was sort of the story of how we got there. And from a practical purpose, I mean, we use it for a lot of different things. So we use it as a thought leadership tool, obviously, and a lead magnet. So it's been amazingly popular. There've been over 50,000 books distributed now. So it's got a fair amount of reach out there. Thank you. And it's also, we use it in the way we think about our own marketing, in the way we coach our marketing team. And now that I've now left the nurturing bonds of Plannuh, who acquired my company. And I use it on a day-to-day basis because I coach and advise marketers on how to do marketing. And I refer to the book and make sure they all read the book in advance. So it's very heavily used in my day-to-day life.
Oh, that's outstanding. Well done. Congratulations again. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think what I really enjoyed about it was, again, the very practical nature of it. This is what marketing strategy is. Here's, don't mix up your understanding of a campaign. Just chapter after chapter. It was really, really interesting. And so as you're utilizing the book and as you're working as a recovering CMO, what are some of the additional, in addition to what you've already shared, are there other sort of top challenges that CMOs struggle with that you, as you work with them?
There are a lot of things that people struggle with, and there's some common threads that you see from time to time. So we're all dealing with interesting economic headwinds right now. It's a weird world that we're living in at this point. And so the idea of agility is really important. And what happens is a lot of marketers will say, well, everything's changing, so I'm just not even going to write it down. Bad idea. What you need to do is write things down in a framework, in a plan, so that you can actually change it and understand the interrelation between elements of your plan. And it's almost like, I think it's the SEALs who say you got to go slow to go fast. And the idea is you need to be able to actually put together a solid, well thought out. Doesn't have to be 1,000 pages and printed in a binder somewhere, but it has to be a plan that hangs together that everyone agrees to. And what is a plan? It's first of all, your stated goals along with your metrics, targets, and milestones to get there. It's a definition of your marketing strategy. How am I going to get to those goals at the end of the day? And a broad campaign framework for what are the broad set of initiatives that I'm going to employ to help me reach those goals, and a set of financials that's tied to that around how am I going to apply my resources to get there. If you have that as a core, then you should be able to have sort of the agility in place to move along. So this idea of agility is key. The second thing that CMOs struggle with on a day-to-day basis is coherence. So I think about coherence is a plan and a set of initiatives that a mere mortal can understand. The challenge in today's complicated world is that you may have thousands of elements to your overall plan. And I get that. I understand that business is complex. And if you've got a big company or even a medium-sized company, there's a lot going on. Your goal as a leader is to make sure that your plan is actually understandable by the people who are supposed to be following it. And how do you do that? You anchor your plan to a set of core thematic campaigns that are designed to rally people around the key activities, the key initiatives that you think are going to help you get there. So get the campaign framework set up. Make sure you're aligned on the strategy for how you're going to achieve your goals. And those things around sort of agility and coherence are the most important gaps that people have beyond this basic financial IQ. That's a gap that people have. And if you focus on those three things, I think you'll see that people will have materially improved outcomes in their marketing function.
Well, and I could definitely feel that and sense that in the book as well. That, table after table of columns of suggested content. If your campaign, if your strategy is this, here's a variety of campaigns. Here's a variety of metrics that you could use. X% of this, X% of that. That was really, really helpful. But the other thing, and I was wondering if you could comment on it, is I know that one of the key aspects, particularly for marketing operations, is how do I communicate marketing results, marketing progress to executive management, a board of directors, a CEO, et cetera, or particularly also non-marketing, individuals or executives, partnering with a CFO, partnering with, another leadership team, et cetera, to prove the value of that marketing team. So can you talk a little bit about what's the right place to do that type of communication about the value, financial being part of it, of course, but how do you help teams overcome that?
Absolutely. In fact, you may have seen it. There's a chapter in my book, chapter 11, how to present marketing results to your CEO and board. And in fact, this was one of the key things that I added to the second edition of the book, because I found I was helping people do this a lot. And this is after, and I know you've been around the sun many times too as a CMO, Glenn, and you've probably done your share of executive and board presentations. And like me, you probably learned a lot by being batted against the head a lot, by getting it wrong a few times before you get it right. And there are a few things that are really critical to keep in mind when you're communicating to an audience like this. First of all, don't speak in marketing speak. Translate your activities and outcomes to a financial outcome, something that people will appreciate and understand. And you can talk about things like pipeline is fine because people get that, but don't talk about open rates and don't talk about click rates and don't bury them with buzzwords. The related thing is when you're communicating, don't give people an activity report. Talk about outcomes. It has to be about results. You can give people a framework of, hey, these are the campaigns that are going on, but don't tell them I sent 4,200 emails and I did a bunch of events. Nobody cares. They just don't. What they care about is, what did you invest and what was the result of that investment? So if you can communicate what your investments were, the strategy behind those investments, et cetera, and how you're doing, that's great. The other thing that people often get wrong when they're communicating results is context. Context is incredibly important when you're communicating to any audience, but especially this kind of an audience. If you have an executive review where you're going to do a quarterly review for a board or for the exec team or monthly, whatever it is, they're not steeped in the data every day like you are. So don't get up there and proudly say, we generated $1 million of pipeline. Okay. Is that good or is that bad? Where are you based on where you thought you'd be? And give people a sense of context for the overall performance. So there are a few more things. I won't go through all of the elements of that chapter, but it's one of my favorite ones. I actually do a seminar pretty frequently, and I've had thousands of people go through it. It's one of our best reviewed seminars that I've done because it's such an important topic, understanding how to communicate marketing results to an executive audience.
That's wonderful. I appreciate you sharing. So let's dig into a couple more things that marketing operations teams deal with every day. And one of the pieces that comes to my mind is, of course, of content. And there's obviously a huge value for companies in both finding, creating, using, promoting, marketing really effective content. So what's your view on the right balance of that, about being authentic, being sincere, having this content that is really, really powerful for a buyer, whether in a B2B environment or a B2C environment, and making sure that it is always absolutely focused on driving the results, the outcomes, as you just mentioned. How do you do that? What's been your experience?
Yeah, it's interesting, Glenn. One of the first things to understand is, how does it fit in your strategy? So I back up for 30 seconds on strategy. What is a strategy? A strategy is the approach you're going to use to achieve your goal. So quick example, my goal is to get to the top of the mountain. I might take one of multiple strategies. One strategy is I'm going to climb up the steep part, and the other strategy might be I'm going to go along the long circuitous path along the back. Why does the strategy matter? The tools and the approach are going to be very different along the way. If I climb up the steep thing, I need those clippy things and ropes. If I go around the back, I need comfy shoes and plenty of water. So understand the strategy that you're anchored on. Understanding that is really important. Now, if a thought leadership content strategy is central to what you want to do, then you should make sure that you're really authentic and appropriate with the way that you generate your content. So a couple things that I like to keep in mind. One is, you mentioned the idea of authenticity, incredibly important. Don't make your content a thinly veiled product pitch, or people will see that. You may notice that we wrote a whole book, 2 editions of the thing. It does not have the word Plannuh in it. It does in my bio, but literally nowhere else. That's not the idea, right? The idea is make valuable content for your target audience. Okay. Second thing to understand is that I'm a big believer in aspirational targeting of content. So what does that mean? That means that if your typical buyer is a VP of marketing operations, then pitch them CMO content, because you know what? They want that job. And if they want that job, they're going to consume content that is targeted at the job that they aspire to get. And by the way, you may not get a lot of CMOs reading your thing, but you'll get a lot of people who want to be CMOs who are reading your thing. They'll think of it as, hey, here's my glide path to get to the CMO role. Mm. Third concept to understand is that if you are not the specific deep thought leader in a domain, don't pretend to be. Go hire one. And another specific example. So when I was doing my last CMO gig, we had about $1 billion division that was focused on healthcare. And we did healthcare AI for healthcare documentation, really cool stuff. Microsoft bought the company for $20 billion. It was a nice outcome for them. And we had a thought leadership strategy. So what did we do? We actually we had about 8 doctors on staff. Their job was content creation. They weren't, checking people's temperature. They were doing content creation because it's $1 billion business. We had a thought leadership strategy. So what did they do? They wrote, they blogged, they podcast, they spoke, they interacted with customers, they hosted dinners, and it was fantastically successful because if you had some product manager or some marketing person or a salesperson pretend to be the thought leader in healthcare, it would not have rung true. So you need to make sure that you really have credible and authentic kind of talent. We were lucky. We picked a domain in my last company where Scott and I are both serial CMOs, so we could do it ourselves and didn't have to hire someone else.
Sure. I really appreciate the extensive answer that you just provided, because I think I love your comment about aspirational content. I think that could be very, very powerful. But let me extend my question there too, which is, okay, so then in a marketing operations organization, as they are working on the content, et cetera, that they're bringing in, producing, et cetera, making sure it's credible, making sure it's aspirational, et cetera. If you think about the physical marketing impressions that a marketing organization also has to produce, think about, signage or, direct mail kits or marketing brochures, you name it, any sort of physical manifestation and representation of a brand. And then connecting that with the digital, what are your experiences and advice can you give to a marketing organization about how to do that effectively?
Yeah, it's a great question, Glenn, because what's happened interestingly in the industry is if you went back 20 years ago, when you went and developed your brand, you develop your brand for the physical world, and then they'd sort of tweak it for the digital world. The opposite has happened. It's gone way too far. So, for instance, every brand refresh, the first thing they do is they say, do you have web-friendly colors, as an example? Is this going to work in the digital environment? But you can't neglect the physical world, because the reality is, to do an effective job as a marketer, when you're creating a brand experience, you want to create experiences that span environments, whether it's digital, whether it's physical, whether it's audio, whether it's video, experiential, and everything in between. You need to make sure that that brand experience is consistent and at the right quality level. So that means that, as an example, think about, well, what does the physical representation of my brand look like? What does it feel like? What materials do I use? What colors do I use? Things like that. You really need to understand that. And it was really interesting because the last major brand refresh that I did was, before doing little things for a little company, for a very large company, we focus very much on what will the the digital experience be? In fact, we worked very hard to say, hey, what is the interactive version? Because we did sort of voice interactive stuff. So it had to be sort of, but we also really focused on how is this going to feel in the real world? And it really came together the first time we had a physical event, as an example. It was incredible, the power we had, because people felt for the first time, hey, this physical experience matched the digital experience, matched everything in between. And it created just such a strong feeling for the customers or our employees, because it was our big annual conference. It just blew everyone away. So thinking and I think if you want to stand out in today's world, because today far too many people are only thinking about the digital world, do the little bit of extra work and say, think about the physical expression of my brand, and you will absolutely stand out if you do that the right way.
Yeah, it really drives the brand equity and the perception of the brand, all of those various touch points, and the consistency that you mentioned, I think is really key. So before we wrap up today's episode, what is the main takeaway that you want to share to help understand the challenges facing marketing operations executives today?
Yeah, if I had to boil it down, and you already called me out, I know I can have high verbosity, so I apologize to your listeners in advance. Hopefully we'll have a good, strong edit to get out of this thing. So if I had to boil it down, though, I'd say that first, have a plan. So don't declare planned bankruptcy. You absolutely have to have a plan. Make sure that plan is aligned across the functional teams that you're operating within, and make sure that plan is connected to real financial outcomes. And then finally, overlay the idea of coherence. Make sure that your plan is focused. You have a core set of campaigns and it should be, if you have more than half a dozen campaigns, you should question yourself. So think about what are the core campaign themes that you and your team are going to get behind, that are going to help you achieve the goals to ultimately have a successful outcome for your plan that is measured in financial outcomes. If you can do half of that stuff, you're going to be far more successful than most people out there.
Excellent. We will leave it there. That wraps up this episode of The Art of Marketing Operations. Thank you so much for joining us today, Peter.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. Loved it.
Well, until next time, stay safe and take care.
Thank you for listening to The Art of Marketing Operations, brought to you by Taylor. Don't forget to hit subscribe in your favorite podcast player. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and share. Until next time.